All right. Hey, Ira, how are you?
I'm doing fine.
Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
I appreciate your having me here.
Why don't you just tell us your story? Why don't you go give us your backstory? Tell us about your life. I know you got a book to promote, but give us a little background on yourself first. Then we'll talk about the book.
Well, I was born in a poor family, and I learned how to read and write very early. The story goes that my mom told me I had attached myself to her leg and wouldn't let loose while she was vacuuming the floor until she promised to teach me how to read. And I was like 3 years old at the time. So I learned how to read, and by the time I was five, I'd read all the books that all the little kids are supposed to read. And I started reading more adult books, such as Theirs is the Kingdom, which was the first book I read by Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's a book
Oh,
about martyrdom.
yeah.
My dad saw me reading that, and the next thing I know, he's suggesting books to me, things like Tom Sawyer and Drums Along the Mohawk, James Fenimore Cooper. So I read a lot of classics, and we spent a lot of time out in the woods because my dad and mom were both woodsy. They like to fish, they like to hunt, they like to camp. And I spent a lot of time reading in between. And that's how I grew up, reading and camping and working.
Well, it sounds like you lived a kind of a Tom Sawyer life when you were a kid, yeah?
Yeah, we had a little gang, and I was the head of the gang, and we used to get on our bicycles and ride 10 miles out into the country, and we'd have our fishing poles and stuff and our crawdad traps, and we'd catch frogs and crawdads and fish and have us a big old feast. When fruit was in season, we'd pick a little fruit along the way because I was living in Modesto, California, where a lot of fruit grows or used to grow. And that's basically what we did as kids, is all kinds of stuff, just like Tom Sawyer did.
So then what did you do when you grew up?
When I grew up, boy, that was different. I worked my way through college. I had to have a full-time job. And of course, I was under the draft if I didn't score high enough on my tests and classes, or if I quit work and didn't have any money. So the pressure was on. And then after I got out of college, I thought, hey, I'm going to get me a job. Well, even with a degree at that time, especially a degree in English, it was difficult to get a job. And I wound up going back to what I knew best. I had worked in the fields picking fruit and vegetables, and I worked in my dad's meat shop. So I went into producing food, and I worked as a cook for Campbell's Soup, making Swanson TV dinners, and
Oh, yeah.
I worked in a turkey slaughter plant, and I uh, I was a pizza cook for a while, and just all kinds of different jobs, mostly having to do with food until I finally got into meat inspection and I became a meat inspector. And of course, all this delayed my writing career. It's pretty hard to work 5, 6, 7 days a week sometimes and then turn around and do any writing at all.
Well, that's true. I mean, writing takes, you have to sort of decompress a bit before you can get to your creative brain because sometimes the left brain will dominate the right brain and the right brain sort of goes to sleep. At least for me, it does. I have to find
Yeah.
some clear space to shut down the left side so the right side can wake up and start working. I wanted to go back to something you said about the draft. I assume this was for Vietnam. Was that
Yes.
okay? So in those days, if you were in college full time, you got a deferment, right? You didn't have to go.
Right. You got to deferment until the lottery came in, and the lottery came in just as I was graduating. And I was lucky enough. I got a low lottery number, but they didn't take up to my number. There was just right below me was the last one that they took, so I didn't have to go.
Yeah, because I did hear about there were different ways that people could avoid going to Vietnam, and I knew that college was one of them. Was being married another one?
Yeah, being married was another one for a while, but I think they took that away too. But I wasn't married until about half. I was almost to the end of my college days. I got married.
You mentioned something about Swanson's TV dinners. Is there any secret you want to tell us about why we should not eat those because of what's put in into those things?
Yeah, yeah. That was 1974, 75. That was when I was working for them, and that was the year that I decided I would not eat processed food anymore.
I don't blame
And
you. Yeah.
the reason is salt and sugar. And it comes to a little story. I was cooking one day and I had to carry all these bags up this real skinny ladder way up to the top. And I noticed what was in the bags, and some of them were there were 2 bags of salt and like 3 different kinds of sugar, and they're way more than I would use if I were cooking. So I asked my supervisor, what the heck's going on? Where are we putting all this salt and sugar in here? And he says, well, salt's cheap, sugar's cheap, and if you put it in the right proportions to each other, then your tongue doesn't know.
And what is the point of doing that? Just to enhance the flavor of the food?
No, no, that it has nothing to do with enhancing the flavor. The proportions is what enhances the flavor, but the amount of salt and the amount of sugar put in adds weight to the product. And since the product is sold by weight, you
Oh,
get extra profit.
so that's how they pad it.
Yeah, that's how they pad it.
I see. Okay. Well, aside from padding the product, that's not good for you to eat all that salt and all that sugar either, is it?
No.
From what I've read, that kind of food, like TV dinners and stuff, are probably the worst on the list for processed, for chemicals, for too much sugar, too much salt. Some of them, they're like sodium bombs, the amount of salt in those things, yeah?
Well, if they put in the right proportions, they can put a lot of sugar in there too without you even knowing it.
Well, let's move on. Let's talk about your book. You've got a book called We Won't Forget You, Mr. McGillicuddy.
Hmm.
Why don't you tell us a little about that?
Well, it's a book about revenge and a book about love. And the love part is the love that the McGillicuddy family shows each other by their actions and tackling all the crises that come their way. And the revenge part is where someone in the head of the family's past, really distant past, 40 years, um, got really mad at him for something he did. And now he still wants revenge, and he's become a manager of a security firm contracted out to the NSA. And their first assignment, of course, is to find radical bloggers online, of which our hero is a blogger.
Okay. Any more?
Well, I've been told that by people that they got to love the family and that they really felt like they had joined it when they read it. And I spent a lot of time in developing the characters. I actually took some of the characters from my own family and friends. And some of the incidents actually came from my experience of taking care of my dad when he had dementia. As in the McGillicuddy book, the family's taking care of a World War II veteran who has dementia.
How long did you take care of your father?
Oh, gosh, it was several years. I think it started back in the 90s sometime, mid 90s.
And
I started taking care.
when did he pass away?
He passed away, let's see, 6 years ago.
Oh, so you 15 years at least, something
Yeah,
like that?
14, 15 years. It wasn't so much at the beginning. At the beginning, it was mostly just taking care of his finances because he was able to take care of himself for the most part. The progression of the disease was really slow. And we found that we were able to slow it down even further by giving him turmeric, which is a spice that they use in pickling. And you give it with a little bit of oil and some black pepper. And in that way, the body's able to use it completely and it does something to reduce the inflammation, and it does something to reduce the number of platelets that's in your brain, in your where your nerve cells are.
Huh. How do you administer that? Because that's got to taste awful.
Oh, I know. We just gave him a capsule, and he'd take it with his other vitamins when he ate his breakfast in the morning.
Oh, there was a capsule. Okay, because I was envisioning like a spoon of powder with oil and
That would be gross.
oh, that would be terrible. Yeah. Oh, okay. So it does come in capsule form then.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Did the because I've never heard of that for dementia. Did the doctors recommend that, or did you find that out on
No,
your own?
it was some research I did myself, and I was researching different things that could be helpful, and that turned out to be one of them. The reduction of inflammation in the body is a really great thing for anybody who's suffering from any disease, because inflammation is what causes most of it.
There's very little known about dementia and how to. I mean, I've read books and I've seen different articles and stuff on the internet about people's experience with it, and that's about the best place you can draw information. Really, is from other people who have had to care for somebody who had it, and the one commonality that I see between all of these stories is trying to convince the person initially that they have it because they don't want to believe it. And they can get angry at you, saying, there's nothing wrong with me, I don't have anything. Or they find that doctors have a difficult time diagnosing it, or they'll misdiagnose it. Did you have any of those experiences?
We did not. My dad he actually knew what was happening to him, and we had several discussions as he was going into forgetfulness. And he was upset about it, and he didn't like it, but he was more accepting than I had seen. I've seen what you're talking about from other people. I've seen them get angry, and when you suggest that they're losing their minds, and it's a terrible thing to have to deal with. Fortunately, we didn't have to deal with that particular problem.
Well, you were lucky, I think. And I think it was kudos to your father for actually recognizing that he had that problem, yeah?
Mm-hmm. And he tried to do his best to keep the problem from onsetting faster. One of the things he did is, even though he needed a walker, he'd go out and he'd trot down the block and trot back up every day. He did that until he was 92 and a half years old.
Oh, wow. Well, how old was he when he died?
I was just shy of his 94th birthday.
Oh, so he lived a long life.
He lived
Yeah,
quite a long life, yes.
yeah. That's about 10 years better than the average, I think, these
Yeah,
days. Isn't it? What's the average life expectancy in America these days? 80,
I think
mid
it's like
80s somewhere?
mid 80s, 85, 86.
Yeah, yeah, that's about the average. Well, he did well then.
Yes,
And
he did.
and he had no other issues, cancer, nothing like that?
No.
No? Wow. Well, that's lucky. You might have good genes. You might be around for another 50 years or so, yeah?
Well, it's the genes are pretty good, and they are important. But also, what's important is our family's traditionally raised a lot of its own food in gardens.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that is important too. If you,
And my dad also ate a lot of wild food, and we ate some growing up. But he was an orphan, and he was taken in by his uncle after his dad and mom passed away. And his uncle, well, he was friends with Johnny Walker. You know Johnny Walker? Quart a day. So
sounds
my
familiar.
dad,
Yeah.
yeah, my dad didn't have much of a life with him, and sometimes there wasn't much food around, so he went out and got his own.
When you say wild food, what do you mean, like hunting?
I mean, like going out to hunt, and he used to tell me how um, Uncle Bill would give him one bullet for his 22 and send him out, and he'd go out and find dinner. And he had to make that one shot count. But he also fished, and he also found plants and roots and berries and nuts and stuff out in the wild that he could eat. And he's passed some of that knowledge on to me. But like he told me, he said, I can only pass on just a small amount of what I know, which is only a small amount of my teacher. But I'm passing on what I can to you so that it will help you.
Do you do that still? Do you go out and hunt?
I haven't hunted for a long time. I do go out and fish,
Okay.
and I do know some plants and do harvest some plants out in the wild
All right.
for use for food and use for medicines and other things.
Great. We do have to wrap this up. We've kind of run out of time. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yes, my website is irawhite.net.
Okay, very simple. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Ira, and sharing very interesting stories. Best of luck